Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This has been created for those of us that love radical women who live perhaps by the rules, but also question and challenge the status quo. We want more from our lives, to enjoy our sexuality, to explore radical thought, and to celebrate women who have lived and continue to live unconventional lives. Hi, I'm Dr. Toni Bear, sexologist, educator, activist, and definitely a radical woman. Thank you for joining me as I share stories of women challenging the status quo and living life to the fullest. Join me as we unapologetically march to the beat of a different drummer together. Well, Vi, here we are again at the Radical Rhythm Podcast in your library. Thank you so much for hosting me once again. As your scholar in residence, I am very grateful to be able to stay here. And, it keeps me out of trouble for the most part.
Well, you do A, you have the keys. B, it may be the center for sex and culture, but it's being called Tony's Place, so take that for what it is.
So there you go. Thank you so much. And we don't have to do this via Zoom. So here we are in the reading room of the Center for Sex and Culture, run by the Carter Johnson Library in Evansville, Indiana. And we're going to talk kinky books today. Not kinky boots, kinky books. And I wanted to share this conversation with our audience because,
I'm in trouble.
yeah, so I asked Vi the other night, what are the 5 most influential kinky books of all time? Which is a great drinking conversation, but we weren't drinking. And I guess that was a bit too broad. So I said, Vi, well, what if we did a program on your 5 favorite kinky books? And I thought that's where we landed. No, we're not there.
Yep. Tony, I have 2.5 houses full of books. Now, you and I have often talked about the fact that I believe that every book has a spirit. And if every book has a spirit, it also has an attitude, good or bad. Now, you want me to narrow down to 5 from thousands? Do you have a clue what kind of attitude all the rest of my books would have if I said, even out loud, these are my 5 favorites? I would have thousands of books with a bad attitude. Now, think about thousands of books related to erotica and sex that all have a bad attitude. What are you trying to do to me?
Isn't that the name of a magazine next door? Bad
Bad
Attitude?
attitude. Yes.
I thought so. Yeah, no, I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but I am about to go out of town and back home again.
Mhm.
So I want to get out of town before the books get too angry.
Thanks a heap, really.
So that's what this program is. If you tuned in to this craziness, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Vi and I have had a blast doing this podcast. We've been doing one every 4 to 6 weeks for
Yeah.
about 6 months now.
Yep.
And
right.
and I thought it was time to make a commitment to something. And the commitment is, what are your 5 favorite kinky books? And if I rephrase it, what if I was a beginning kinkster, somebody who likes kink? What 5 books should I have on my shelf?
Now that's a whole different question. Okay.
I mean, the right of bragging rights because I have these cool books on my shelf, not because I'm a beginner and I want to learn how to slap and tickle. I'm talking about I would be really proud to have these 5 pieces of art literature on my shelf. I made it harder again.
Kind of, sort of, but here we go. And once again, you're stuck with a librarian. So the first is a story. There's a tremendous amount of fun for me about starting a young collector or a young bibliophile on the path to their own library. But every library is sort of kind of aimed at the likes and dislikes of its owner. However, if you can narrow down your likes, are you a fiction reader? Are you a nonfiction reader? Are you a historian? Are you a researcher? That kind of narrows down those 5 books a little. Now, if I talk about mine in terms of certain books that I would give a young scholar from my library to seed theirs, since I can say that because I have dupes of a lot of them. Um, I would probably, and this is going to be in no particular order, starting from the modern and working backward. I think one of them would be Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns by Molly Devon and Philip Miller. It is a universal beginner's book that tackles what it is we do for the curious beginner with a lot of information, but also a sense of humor, so that we are not taking our curiosity, our play, our desires so seriously that we miss the joy and the reason we started to play in this great erotic arena. So, Screw the Roses would be one of them.
It's a really light book, meaning it's easy to read
Yes.
and entertaining enough to keep your attention, right?
Now, second, and probably just as modern, would be any of the writing of Gail Rubin. Now, that's for the scholar slash researcher in that person that I was talking about. Now, if and I'm swerving here, so don't shoot me. If there were less scholar and more just plain hot fiction, I would then say, well, instead of Gale, let's switch off on some of the work of Patrick Olivia. Hot erotic fiction. I would say let's back up to the older books. And, for snottiness, let's try and find a first edition of something like Macho Sluts or Doing It for Daddy or something like that. If you are more the academic, let's go for Gale.
And what would you suggest of Gail's?
Actually, about 2 years ago, I believe, she put out a compendium of a lot of her articles. And it is brilliant reading because it's a taste of Gail's mind from a lot of different directions, from the professorial to the um, researcher for this tribe, to the true cultural anthropologist, to the PhD who is working with Caris and other members of the American Board of Psychiatry. All of that rolls into Gail's papers. And that book is a compendium of them. So if you're more into the academic, I'd recommend Gail.
So start with Screw the Roses, and then there's 2 paths
Yes.
to the hotness and to the academic.
Mhm.
Okay. And if you're adventurous, do both. Okay. So I'm seeing this like Candyland kind of board,
Uh-huh.
right?
Exactly.
Okay. So I'm going around the board, and now what's my third stop?
Now, the third stop is more pamphlet than it is book. But I think it's a very important work because it was a first. And that's a little pamphlet called What Color is Your Handkerchief? It was put out by the women of Samoa, and it was a series of articles. The little pamphlet, I think, is only about 30 to 32 pages long. Put out, I believe, in the late 70s, with articles that are actually still timely today. It was put out for leather women, by leather women, by the Sisterhood of Samoa. And even though finding the originals is very difficult, finding a Xerox copy to put in a little notebook or in its own little cover to also have on your shelf, I think is a very important piece because of its historical significance.
Okay. So those are the first three landings. Now, Screw the Roses, that book is for all people. I mean, all these books are for all people, but that is generic kind of kink. Gail, her research is kink across the board.
Mhm.
But when you hit Pat Califia back in the day and those erotic examples you gave, that's mostly
Hot.
Leatherdyke.
Mhm.
And then Samoa is mostly Leatherdyke. Now, if someone is not LGBTQ, if somebody is not um, female identified, would you still suggest that those would be the items that they should acquire first?
Yes. Okay. Screw the Roses, universal. Samoa, because of its place in history. Dr. Rubin, because she is Dr. Gail Rubin. And this woman is the number one cultural anthropologist and researcher for this tribe. And her work goes across the board because her work studies this tribe and what it is that we do, from her early dissertation all the way up to now.
Okay. So those are the first three stops on the Candyland board.
For Patrick Califia, um, just like Tony DeBlas, the founder of Desmoda's Publications, being absolutely shocked when he found out that women read Drummer and Dungeon Master. Guys read good, hot lesbian fiction because there are an awful lot of folk, male, female, or gender neutral, who are picturing themselves in the positions of at least some of those characters, or quite possibly in the middle of the exploits of some of those characters.
Wow. So I'm guessing some men read lesbian porn or
Some.
lesbian erotica. What I'm thinking about is the reverse happens, I know, quite often too, that women like watching gay male porn. No
Mhm.
matter if you're straight or gay, it doesn't matter.
And what do you mean by some? I'd say it's a lot more than that, but that's just in my own twisted and demented mind.
Right. So what would be the fourth work that you would suggest?
The fourth, um, because of my own path within this tribe, both as a slave and as someone who is fascinated by the workings of the human mind, would be The Story of O by Pauline Réage. Yes, it is a hot work in terms of its action and its scene setting and so on, but it's also a serious psychological study of submission, in that with the main character, O, you are listening to a lot of her thoughts. You are not only seeing the action through her eyes, you're part of the action through her mind. Um, there is a very, I would believe, symbolic passage somewhere around 60 or 70 pages in. She's about to be, tormented, tied, and all of those things that are going on. And this is being done in front of the man she loves. But as she is being prepped for this, the thing that's going through her mind as she looks at him lovingly and looking for strength is also the fact that she needs to replace his slippers because his slippers are worn. That is something that a dedicated slave would look at, glance, and make a mental note of no matter what was going through their mind. And through O's eyes, ears, and mind, we step into not just her place, but into her headspace.
So the story of O is a story of a sex slave? You use the word slave, and I know some people in our audience do not know what you're referring to.
She is a slave. She is in service, first to the man she loves, and then to the man that she is given to, and comes to love him in a completely different way, as she would love a stronger. Sir Stephen was almost a father and authority figure to her, and she gravitated to his power. But is she there only for sex? No, she's there for more than that. She is there to serve him in any way that he wishes to be served, and that includes sex.
Okay. So this is a piece of fiction, but you're saying it also doubles as kind of a psychological study of the internal workings of someone who is a submissive in a power relationship.
Yes, yes, indeed. And the backstory to the book is actually quite interesting. Um, Studying the life of Pauline Réage, and by the way, that wasn't her real name, that was the pseudonym on top of the pseudonym to truly hide her identity because she was so famous in literary circles in her time. But her paramour, boyfriend, fill in the blank, was a great lover of the work of the Marquis de Sade and his writings. And he believed that no woman could write in de Sade's style. Réage took up that challenge and in doing so produced The Story of O. When you get a copy of some of the early editions, and I don't think it's changed, but I'm not really sure, the preface to the book was done by the man who issued that challenge and who was her lover. Most think that he was her editor only. And while he was part of the editing team, he was also the book's inspiration.
Wow. So that's the story of O. Did they make a movie of that too?
Actually, a couple of them were done. One was a movie which created all kinds of sensationalism in the mid 70s when it hit the United States. But of course, so did the book. The book was on the banned list for the longest time. Um, there was also a series. I do not believe the series was shown in the United States, but it was a 12 or 13 episode series that was produced in Europe. It can be purchased here, but I don't think it was ever really shown
Okay. So what's the fifth book? I'm dying of curiosity
here.
here.
Now,
Are we going back in time again?
we're backing up.
Okay.
Um, the fifth book is on my list, one because it happens to be really hot reading, even though I don't think that was not its intent. Um, the book is Psychopathia Sexualis.
Oh, what a what?
The book of Ellis and a psychiatrist of his early era who created or coined the term masochism, um, and who kept a series of very short notes on all of his clients. And most of his clients were anything from slightly twisted to full blown deviant. And the very short paragraphs, most of these as case studies, were probably only 3, 4, 5 paragraphs long. he compiled into one book on the psychopathia of sex, Psychopathia Sexualis. Now, there is a certain humor to it for me because, yes, it is a historically significant book that was done in the early 1900s. It's hot. The case studies are really good reading, especially if you're twisted. Um, but in the early days of pornography and a lot of the groups, earlier versions of women against porn, like the anti-erotic Biblion Society and the Society Against Illustrative Progress, and there were a few others that I can't even think of now, were screaming about what was illicit, what was pornography. So a lot of our early fiction, and to some extent nonfiction, was hidden in other books, hidden in the sense of there were usually paragraphs in the front of the book that said this work is for members of the psychological, legal, and I'm sure there is at least one or two others, professions. So it was couched in you're only using this for research.
Mm.
There was a series that was done in the 50s on masochism, sadism, fetishism, and transvesticism that usually had about 30 pages of black and white photographs in the middle. And they called it a psychological textbook. Now, I remember my psych textbooks. They didn't have any kind of illustrations like those in the center. But Psychopathia Sexualis was another that, yes, this one happened to have been written by a psychiatrist and was written as a psychological study. But taking that moving forward, a lot of other publishers disguised erotica that way. And then, because keeping me on track has never been easy for you to do, although you do it better than most, um, just one more.
Oh, you want to add a bonus?
Yeah, that's the ticket.
It's
Let's just call this a
the
bonus book.
the 5 books that you should have on your shelf if you're starting a kinky library bonus.
Bonus would be anything by the Marquis de Sade.
Is that possible to get something?
Sure. That now you know I chase rare books, and I like knowing that I have first edition sitting on the shelf in the rare book room. But Justine, Juliet, and 120 Days of Sodom are his 3 best known works, and they can be purchased in almost any bookstore as a paperback. And I would recommend it. Now, of course, then there is the bibliophile in me that's going, one more rare book on a young bibliophile shelf is one more that can't be destroyed. And you and I have gone down that road before in terms of what I think of book burners, and all of your viewers' ears are way too sensitive for me to go on that tirade.
Right, right. So, why is it important to read about the history of kink? If you're kinky, I mean, why is this important? Why Screw the Roses is more of a how-to kind of book.
Mm-hmm.
Story of O, Coming to Power, Macho Sluts, hot reading.
Mm-hmm.
But why would you want to read about the psychology and the history and the anthropology of kink?
Okay, for the psychology, kind of nice to have an outside perspective on why it is you do what you do. For the history, and I'm going to see if I can make 4,000 thoughts really short.
You don't have to make them too short.
If you don't know where you've come from, you don't have a clue where you are, much less where you're going. On a more focused and possibly more selfish note, a knowledge of those who have come before you instills a little bit of extra pride. But more importantly, it takes away the, well, we must have just invented this. There is a lot to be said for knowing that all that I am and all that I am is the next step in an incredibly long road. That the road backs up past the 60s, the road backs up past the 40s and bringing over the American fetish that is now leather. The road backs up past 1913 and the first emergence of the American fetish movement. The road backs up past the 1800s and the profound amount of writing that suddenly emerged from the European sex movement. The road backs up past the 1800s or the 1700s or the 1600s for that matter, and this can keep going backward. We are not deviants in that what we do has crawled out of a closet. What we do is a variation of the different way to love that our grandparents did, that our great grandparents did, that our great, and I could keep backing this thing up. 4 years, 5 years ago, there was an auction at Christie's of erotica going back to the 12th century. Christie's at first were kind of nervous about touching it, but it was a collection of, I can't remember his first name, I think it was Philippe Normand. And his collection of erotica was stupendous, and it was so extensive and so expensive that the only one who could conceivably do the auction would have been Christie's. But think of what it means to hold a piece of erotica from the 1300s or the 1200s. Not only are you not alone, you never have been. And that's what a book gives you.
I think that is a fantastic place to end this podcast. So, thank you, Vi, for giving us so many examples of books that would be a great way to start your own collection of kink. Of course, folks probably started their collection of kink with
50 Shades of Grey?
magazines. No, I hope not. It's 50 Shades of Grey. We can do a whole show just on that. But every person's entry point is probably at a different intersection someplace. So we'll do more shows together, I hope. And I'm taking off for Pennsylvania again soon, but we will do it across the airwaves as we have. For those of you listening in today, thank you so much for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast. Vi, thank you again for your insight. And I hope our listeners will add to their collection, maybe in a way that they hadn't thought before.
Love it.
Thank you for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. It has truly been my pleasure to invite guests and talk to you about my passion, the joy in our sexuality, and radical women who march to the beat of a different drum. If you'd like to work with me, Dr. Toni Bear, I have a community where I give seminars every month. I also have a coaching program, both group and individual, and also a course, a self-directed course, because it's all about experiencing the joy life has to offer. I'd love to work with you. Check out my link below, www.tonibearedd.com. See you next week, and don't let anyone dim your shine.